What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Health Yes, here at Cameron County Public Health, where we talk about all things public health and more. I'll be your host today, Javier C, and joining us on this episode, meteorologist with the United States National Weather Service, Mr. Barry Goldsmith. Today's episode is all about the weather, and quite literally, one of the hottest topics we've had on the show so far, as well as what to expect in the coming months with hurricane season just over the horizon. Welcome to the show.
So I'm Barry Goldsmith from the National Weather Service. I've been here in the Valley for almost 16 years come November. And my career dates all the way back to 1986, where I began in the Washington, D.C. area, which is my hometown. I graduated from Penn State University and then continued as a verification specialist. Basically, how do you assess how warnings and advisories and forecasts are doing? And then I moved out into what's known as the field, where we actually get to forecast. And so my jobs between 1993 and 2007 were in the forecast field at both the Washington office that serves Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware at the time, and then moving down to the west coast of Florida, where I got my tropical chops, understanding how hurricanes works and actually working events like that, including Hurricane Charlie in 2004. And then I got promoted to a job here in the Valley, which is known as the Warning Coordination Meteorologist. And that job is probably why I pursued the career in the first place in the agency, to best serve the public in terms of a safety aspect and a preparedness aspect. So my core partners, if you will, are anyone who works in public safety, whether it's in the Rio Grande Valley, Texas, or the U.S. overall. And my role is to provide public relations and customer service so that people understand what we're trying to do in the weather service and how to be safe when bad weather strikes.
Awesome! Wow. So you've been in the I guess the weather business for a long time then.
38 years in January.
Wow! Oh my goodness! Almost going on to that big 40 then. So normally people like to start off with the icebreaker. Hey, how about that weather? But today we're here to talk about hey, how about that weather? Down here in the Valley we're used to high heats, but recently we've been having a huge heat wave.
Yeah, so the heat that began in early June, and I mean heat as in heat that we're not quite used to.
Because it came on pretty early too. We usually expect the heat to come on mid, maybe almost late summer, but I feel like it's come on pretty quickly.
Yeah, we flipped a switch in the weather pattern. We had a warm to dry winter and early spring, and then we had a wet period from the end of March through the beginning of June. And with that wetness comes relatively cooler air. When it rains, it gets a little cooler, especially as you get closer to the summer season, which we in the meteorology world look at as June through August. So we started June with these thunderstorms. They produced some wind and some hail, but when they were over, it was in the upper 60s. It felt real nice out there. And so the temperatures for the first 8 days were below average. They were actually kind of nice for this time of year. But then we saw the pattern shift immediately to what we know as La Canicula, the dog days.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the dog days are actually on the calendar between July 3rd and August 11th, but the pattern can start as early as May and continue into October.
Okay.
So this year we saw that pattern setting up on June 9th, literally that day, and we could see it was going to last for 2, maybe 3 weeks, and sure enough, it did. And so for the period from June 9th through the end of the month, we had record hot temperatures across the Valley at just about every location. And then when we look back at the whole month, because the first 8 days, not so bad, but still warmish, but not super hot, we ended up ranking in the top 5 all-time hottest Junes. And for some locations, that's more than 100 years of record. The hottest period of the year, based on our records, begins around the 15th of July and goes until around the 15th of August. So we're heading into that period shortly, and the weather pattern that we saw in June, which was record heat for the last 3 weeks, is coming back. So being at the hottest time of the season, we can expect more heat. And when we're saying above average, we're talking 100 plus across most of the Valley except near the coast. And that means Brownsville, Port Isabel would stay just under that. But Harlingen to Weslaco to McAllen and points west of there, triple digit days that we saw day after day in June from around June 13th to the end of the month are going to resume and likely continue through the end of July, if not deep into August. So we need to stay ready for heat that's above what we normally expect here in the valley. But the one good news, if there is a little bit of good news, is that we do expect, normally that mid-July to mid-August, meaning Calicula period, is pretty darn hot to begin with. So to be a little bit hotter is not that unusual.
We got something to expect coming up.
Correct.
Right? So what would you recommend for some people to, I guess, prepare for the upcoming heat?
Well, if you did all the things that we asked people to do in June, just continue to do them through July and into August as well. So that means if you're going to exercise, do it early in the morning when it's relatively cooler. But number one, first and foremost, hydrate. Water is what you want to drink.
Absolutely.
And you want to drink it many times through the day, before, during, and after exercise. So don't just think that you need it only after you exercise. You need to be hydrated continuously. If not, the heat-related illnesses can arrive, especially if you are spending any amount of time outside, especially when the sun is beating down. So the illnesses start with heat cramps and kind of migrate into exhaustion, which is when you feel lightheaded, dizzy, might even a little bit faint. And then heat stroke is what can kill you. That's when your body cannot evaporate anymore, and your body temperature rises as if it were being heated by the sun.
Right.
And we're talking not just fever, but a dry fever that can kill you pretty quickly. So we really want people to hydrate often, always. They should already be doing that living down here because it's the nature of the beast where we are, but even more than usual because the temperatures will be hotter than usual. The feels like temperature, which is what the heat index measures, is related to how much you can lose moisture and retain moisture. It's an interesting concept here. So the heat, of course, means you need to have that water in you to be able to sweat and perspire. The problem with the humidity is that when you have all that water in you and you perspire and you can't dry that perspiration off your body, it returns heating to your body. When you have a drier atmosphere, meaning you're outside and the humidity's low, and for instance, you get out of a pool and it feels a little cooler, that's called evaporative cooling, and it does cool your body, and that's a good thing. But when it's really humid out there and hot at the same time, you sweat and you can't evaporate that to cool your body. And the sweat actually recreates more heat into your body, which ultimately will drive that temperature up. And in time, when it becomes near heat stroke, you do evaporate that moisture, but by then your fever is already climbing into the critical zone. And if it goes any farther, you could be dead.
Yeah, my family and I, we had a little bit of a scare the other day because my dad works in public works. He's out in the field all the time, and he told me that like he got sent home because like he was feeling super faint. They had him out basically almost the entire week, and then just one morning he was having his coffee and whatnot, and then he was saying that he had to like grab onto like a chair. We told him like, you don't drink anything else other than your coffee in the mornings, right? And he's like, yeah. I was like, you're not doing yourself any favors either. You have to hydrate yourself. And I don't think your supervisors are reminding you to hydrate enough.
Yeah, you might not realize it. That's the key to these heat-related illnesses, that a lot of people think, okay, I didn't hydrate enough, then I exhausted myself exercising or doing heavy labor, and now I'm fainting. But some people can actually get heat illnesses early on in an event when it's not necessarily that hot, or they don't necessarily feel any issues at first, and then suddenly it starts to come on, and that's that pre-hydration that was not done. So if you're only drinking coffee in the morning, you're not putting water in your body when you first wake up day after day, and you're outside day after day not thinking about it, it could come at a time you don't expect it to come.
Exactly.
And
this
then
happened
it
to him
can
in
get
the
worse.
morning.
Yeah.
And this, he wasn't out there yet.
Right.
This happened in the morning, and then he goes on to tell us, it's been like this whole week. It's like, well, yeah, this all was leading up to it. It's hitting you when you least expect it, like you've been saying. Thank goodness we got him home. He was hydrated he took his electrolytes, and then we were just telling him, hey, you gotta also drink water.
Yeah, start with water, and then adding electrolytes is fine as you need them, especially if you're doing exercising and working up a bit of a sweat. You definitely want to recover those electrolytes to help your body kind of recover.
Right.
But before you even start exercising, you've got to drink that water and just add more than you normally would during a typically hot summers because of that forecast we just gave you.
There's a common misconception that people think that, just the electrolytes is fine. It's like, no, you also need to hydrate.
So even if you plan to hydrate and you're planning to work outside or you have to work outside, one of the things I noticed during the heart of the heat wave is a lot of the lawn cutters, the yard workers, they were doing early morning and late evening jobs, which is great because that is the better time when that sun's not beating down on you and taking all of that moisture away quickly. Right. Remember, we measure temperature traditionally in the shade, but the reality of people working outside, especially during the daylight hours, is a much higher temperature in the sun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the humidity may go down equivalently, but the moisture is still in the atmosphere. So the effective heat index in the sun could very well be 130, 125 degrees, even though we're only measuring 110 to 115. And so you really don't want to be out there, no matter how hydrated you are, between certain times of day, particularly 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. most days, as we move through the heart of summer, because that's when your effective heat impact on your body will be maximized. So avoid activities then, try to schedule around them. If you must be out there, and people do, I mean, you have the jobs to do, take frequent breaks in shade and hydrate all the time so that you can at least get those jobs done. But don't try to do 2, 3, 4 hours at a time. Make sure you're jumping off there every hour to get shade and water. And it doesn't need to be a long time, but long enough to get that recovery so that you can go back and work safely and not have the threat of a heat related illness begin. Because in the middle of the day, if you start with heat illnesses, meaning cramps and then exhaustion, it could quickly lead to heat stroke. And that's what we don't want to see happen with anybody. The obvious one, of course, is stay near air-conditioned buildings if you can, when you're not a worker like that. And a lot of people do work indoors, and they find that here in the Valley. We find that most buildings do have air conditioning, certainly during the day. One thing we are concerned about are people that are outside at night. They may be homeless, they may be migrants. And when the nights are warm and humid, or actually hot and humid, and our heat index stays above 90, or in fact, sometimes above 95 all night, and we do that over the course of multiple days in a row, if those people cannot find their way to a cooling center, cooling shelter, cool building, it's an accumulated effect of the day and night heat combined that will ultimately bring on heat-related illnesses, or worse, could bring on a heavier casualty or fatality. So we really want to emphasize that when these heat waves get going, that people are not outside for prolonged lengths of time, or not in air conditioning for nights and nights and nights, because that accumulation of day and night combined, and especially night, because let's face it, aside from service stations, your malls are closed, your libraries are closed, your shopping centers are closed, your businesses are closed for the most part. There's fewer places for people to go unless it's a designated all day, all night shelter with cooling temperatures. So it becomes much more acute if there's people that are outside at night.
Exactly.
And even if they're inside during the day, to find places that are fine, when the heat index is over 90 all night long and you're out there and it's 1, 2, 3, 4 plus nights in a row, that accumulates on your body. We really want people to understand how critical that is and how it has contributed to national heat casualty statistics. A lot of it's based on the day and night combination, not just the days alone.
A lot of people think that, just because the sun's gone down, the heat's gone. But there have been several times where I've gone to run an errand later in the night, and just having the window down, and you can still feel that heat, that residual heat from the day. It's still there. As you were saying, the heat index is still up there. And, you hardly see businesses that are open 24/7 anymore. So there is a lot less buildings, cooled buildings available at in the later hours. So what can we expect for, I guess, the upcoming forecast for the rest of July?
So as I mentioned before, July is going to end up being another hot month. Could very well rank in the top 5 hottest, which is saying something. We've had some hot Julys over the recent decade or two. More likely top 10 for sure. I think that's what the latest information that we're seeing. And again, we don't necessarily like to use related to average. Our averages are 30-year rolling averages. So we had quite an uptick in average temperatures between the 30-year sample from 1981 to 2010. Wow. So what used to be in Brownsville, for example, an average high in July of 95 became 97. In McAllen, what used to be about 98 or so became nearly 100. So if we talk about above average, we're basing it on the latest 30-year cycle, which means in McAllen, you'll see a lot of 102, 103, 104 degree days. And if you relate that back to the all-time record, going all the way back to 1942, if this forecast pans out, McAllen, which has had some hot years in the last decade, as I mentioned, those years can be harder to beat. And if we're saying that we can rank among them this July, that has to tell people to be really careful out there, because it's just another year of pretty strong heat that will then kind of line up within that last 10 to 15 year period where we've had many of those top 10s occur going back to the 1940s. So that's the forecast for July. August, right now, we're looking at kind of a two-pronged answer. One could be the worst case scenario for heat, which is a continuation of July deep into the month, if not the entire month, which would look a lot like 2009, where the rains didn't come until the last day or two of the month, but the average temperature for July and August, I think, was all-time record in places like McAllen, and I think Harlingen wasn't too far behind. If we do see a break in the pattern in mid-August where we start to see more tropical waves coming in, not necessarily cyclones, developed systems, but waves of energy that come by mid-August and continue into September, that could cut short the heat wave. It would still be quite warm and soupy, but at least we get some rain and clouds, and that would help to minimize the impact. So that's the unknown answer right now. What happens by mid-August and beyond? We just can't look into our crystal ball strong enough to be sure. If I could, I'd be on a yacht somewhere making millions, saying exactly on this date it will turn. For what it's worth, last year, it's exactly what happened. We had a pretty hot summer going, and then we had a tropical wave system that moved across the coastal plains into the brush country and on to the Rio Grande, right along the Rio Grande from like Zapata County northward to Eagle Pass. And as it came across, it dropped a lot of rain across the brush country and the coastal plains. We had between 8 and 12 inches there, but there were pockets of heavy rain across the valley too. Some areas got 7 to 10 inches over the course of a couple of days there. And then we had a few more events as we leaned into September, and it definitely helped the cause of kind of reducing the heat a bit, where we weren't going to set any new records. So maybe we get the same type of thing this year, but like I said, I can't look into a crystal ball in early July and make that call by mid-August.
We'll think meteorologists and weather forecasters or fortune tellers, but we work with the information that we get. And speaking of tropical weather, with the heat going on, people are very distracted with the heat, but we are currently still in hurricane season, correct?
So hurricane season officially extends from June 1st to November 30th. For all intents and purposes in our part of the world, it's June 1st to mid-October.
Gotcha.
But regardless of where you are in that Atlantic basin zone, whether you're in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, the eastern seaboard of the US, or even Canada, it's August and September that are the peak of the season. And so that's coming. We're only in July now, but August and September are coming. Now, as I say that, the two biggest storms of the last 15 years happened in late July. That was Hurricane Dolly in 2008 and Hurricane Hannah in 2020. Right now, we're not seeing that this July. We're seeing the canicula pattern kind of holding on for the rest of the month. But August isn't too far away, and it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that something finds its way in there during the peak of the season and becomes a system that we have to deal with. So The forecast overall for the basin is a mixed bag, and it's looking at two counteracting features. The first one is the negative one, meaning this would reduce the amount of storms for the season in that region, and that's the El Nino. So El Nino is formed and is rapidly becoming a moderate El Nino. And when El Nino forms, it provides wind shear high in the atmosphere, which tears off the tops of any developing cyclone. And in some El Ninos, you get dry air that hangs around long enough in the tropics too. Both of those things are not able to build the hurricane, if you will, the car that allows the hurricane to run. Right. Yet the other counteraction is we have very warm to near record warm sea surface temperatures and deep sea surface temperatures in the main development region. So that's a positive for hurricanes. It's kind of like high octane gas. So, but again, you have to build a car to run that high octane gas. So the forecast that NOAA put out was right on average. They use a range and a probability. So it was a 40% probability of 12 to 17 named storms for the season. We've already had 3. Arlene, Brett, and Cindy are off the table. So if you take 3 away from that number, it's now 9 to 14 left. But that would include between 5 and 9 hurricanes, which is 7. That's the average over the long term. And 1 to 4 majors, the average for the long term is 3. And as we saw last year with Hurricane Ian in Southwest Florida, it only took 1 storm to make it a U.S. memorable season. There was over $100 billion in damage from Ian alone. So to top all that off, 2 more things to mention. 1, the Gulf of Mexico and Western Caribbean, generally outside the main development region, are wild cards. All it takes is the atmosphere to play just right with a period of low wind shear, sufficient deep moisture. So imagine the wind shear when it's low helps to build your car. Then deep moisture is kind of like oil to help run it, run the engine and run it well. And then the really, really warm waters are your high octane gas, and kaboom, you've got all the ingredients there for not only a hurricane, but one that could rapidly develop and become a real impact maker somewhere along the Gulf Coast. And 2017, though, we weren't looking at an El Nino year like we are now. Hurricane Harvey threaded that needle. It found the gap in the pattern that just broke down long enough to allow a Harvey to form and become a $125 billion event for the USA, which was second ranked only behind Katrina all time. And yet the pattern had to fit just right, like pieces of a puzzle. Whether or not you're an El Nino, La Nina, or La Nada, you can get a wild card in the Gulf of Mexico. That's why we always have to be aware of events that form either in the Western Caribbean or the Southwestern Gulf, which is what Harvey did. And Hurricane Brett, the first Brett not the first Brett, but one of the Bretts in 1999, did form in the Southwest Gulf of Mexico near the Bay of Campeche. And 3 days later, not even 3 days later, it was a Category 4 passing east of South Padre. And eventually did a jug handle turn into Kennedy County and caused some problems there with storm surge making new cuts on Padre Island National Seashore and causing damage and a lot of rain in places like Falfurrias. So what if the next Brett forms this year and makes a jug handle hook right into Boca Chica Beach? Now we're talking a lot of issues for the valley. So we have to be ready, even with that forecast. So remember, I like to say hashtag, it only takes 1 to make your season. Could this be the year that we get another Allen? Could this be the year on the 90th anniversary of the Labor Day hurricane of 1933? Could that find its way to our shores? I wish I could say no or yes at this point, but I can't say anything but question mark. And so for that reason, people need to take advantage of this hot pattern. And so while it's not really a good idea to be out in the middle of the sun during the day, doing the things that you need to do to prepare your home if it needs some repair or prepare, take advantage to do that. So the easy part is building your hurricane supply kit, checking your evacuation plans, whether you decide to stay or go, who you're going to go to, making sure that you have first aid kits, you have plenty of batteries, you have flashlights, all those other things there. And if your home has some areas that are not resilient enough, fix that resiliency now while it is hot and dry, so that if the storms come in August and September, you're ready to go with your plans, your supplies, and your confidence in the building that you're in will be there when the storm is over, when you can come back through the recovery phase.
It may be hot right now, but it is best to take advantage of the time we have now to prepare ourselves for what may be coming around just around the bend. What would you say are some key takeaways that you would like our listeners to take from this podcast in regards to heat and hurricane preparedness?
So overall, in the Weather Service, we've started a program called Weather Ready Nation. And I like to say my role here is to build a weather ready valley.
Right.
And to do that, we need 3 R's to be achieved. One is readiness, another is responsiveness, and the third is resilience. The way I look at it as you need to have the third one first, build resilience. And once you're resilient, you can be more ready and responsive to what's coming your way. So that resilience involves 2 pieces. One is kind of obvious, right? Physical resilience. Where do you live? How is your building or your home able to withstand things like wind, things like rain, even heat? You need to do all you can to build that structural or physical resilience to be ready and responsive. The other one is knowledge resilience. That means knowing what these things are and what they can do, and what they can do to yourself, to your family, to the community, meaning your neighborhood, or to the region as a whole. And once you understand that, you can then build your readiness component, which is your preparedness aspect of it. So if you live in a well-built home that's generally not going to flood, you may choose to stay during the hurricane or during some big weather event. The question is, are you ready for power outages for 7 days or 14 days? Maybe you need a generator, plenty of food supply, items to keep you connected to the world, such as solar cell phone chargers. So when the sun comes out, you can charge them up. And when the cell towers come online, they do come on pretty quickly. You'll have a way of connecting back to the world. All those things should be thought of when it comes to building your knowledge resilience. And when you combine the knowledge and the physical resilience pieces, you then can apply readiness to it, because it kind of folds right into that. And then from there is your responsiveness, because now that you know what the event can do to your life, which means where you live, where your family lives, where you and your family spend time, such as businesses and schools and camps and whatever it may be, then you will be able to respond appropriately, which means the right measured response to the event because of your knowledge that you've built. So rather than panic and do things last minute, or rather than panic and overcommit resources, or not care at all and undercommit resources, you find that sweet spot. And you can then have the response phase right in line with what you've done to build that resilience and build your readiness. And with all those 3 R's being check, 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 you've now made yourself weather ready, which means you have a pretty good chance of not only surviving the storm, but getting through it with minimal impact.
Gotcha.
So, you know, we all ask people to get things like insurance when they can. That's important too, because some things you might not be able to protect as well. That's your peace of mind that if something does get damaged a bit, at least that can be repaired. But wouldn't it be great if you can do all that ahead of time and have minimal repairs needed, such that you wouldn't have to use the insurance?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But people that tend to be 3R checked also have the insurance they need, because they're not leaving any stone unturned. And when all that happens and you've spread that to your family, your friends, your neighbors, your community, then what do? We actually reduce the impact. So most importantly, we reduce the impact on casualty. So that means injury or fatality, we knock that down as much as we can. And then second, you know, we talk about these multi-billion-dollar disasters. Well, if we build the resiliency, we can change multi-billion into multi-million. There's still going to be some issues, but what if we could do that? Then we redefine what we consider a disaster, and it truly becomes more of a natural disaster than a combination of natural based on the weather elements themselves and human based on what we have not done sufficiently enough to build that weather readiness.
Right. What a very informative note to end our episode in. Keep in mind those 3 R's: stay resilient, stay ready, and make sure to stay responsive as well. Remember to check in with the National Weather Service and make sure that you stay informed. Thank you so much to our guest, Mr. Barry Goldsmith. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Remember to follow and subscribe to us on all of our social media platforms at CCPH Texas and search Health Yes on Spotify. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, stay informed. Thank you to all of our listeners, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.